going to talk on that very exciting topic called big data, the next frontier. What is big data? Is it a technology? Is it is it just volume or a value? Why is it important? What will change with the advent of big data? How is it impacting research, education, security? So we've got a policymaker and a practitioner to share their thoughts. The practitioner, Bob Chua from Pulse Group, he's chairman and CEO of Pulse Group PLC, Asia's leading big data and marketing analytics agency. I spoke to him a few years ago. I remember he was talking to me. I was like, oh, okay, I think I get it. So time has passed. I get it a little bit better now. Bob is also a very useful person to know because he's the chairman of the Virtuous Investment Circle. I thought it was vicious. Virtuous Investment Circle, an independent non-profit organization focused on angel investing in Malaysia, and the local advisory panel member for MSC Malaysia. Proud winner of the prestigious Ernst & Young Entrepreneur Award in 2008. We have engineer Dr. Karl from MDEC. Dr. Karl, we know him. He's the director of the Innovation Capital Division at MDEC, and he has been leading MDEC's efforts in strengthening the innovation ecosystem with MSC Malaysia and Digital Malaysia. Now, he has contributed towards the growth of the industry by advocating and implementing various policies, initiatives, including IP valuation, to help entrepreneurs gain funding, new innovation, market share, and international recognition. So he's currently leading the Big Data Analytics Initiative, which aims to proliferate the usage of BDA in all sectors. And I think in this room, you probably have some people who have a very good understanding or a brief understanding. So I think Dr. Karl will take us through that process, and we welcome all questions a little later. So over to you, Dr. Karl.
Okay, very good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Before I start, can I have a show of hand? Any one of you here have not heard about big data? Oh, there's a few people. All right. So I'll encourage you to come in front. Okay, what is big data? As you know, in our daily life, you're caught up with a lot of, these days is digital age, right? In digital age, you collect a lot of different data. You get data from your emails, your WhatsApp, in your social media. When you go to offices, you are working on your computer. You go to Google, and Google is collecting data about you. Go to Facebook, similarly as well. And even, your devices around you, the Internet of Things, like these days even TV, fridge and whatnot are collecting data. And these are machine data, right? So what is big data? Big data is nothing new, but it's becoming important because of the massive explosion of data, because everyone's collecting a lot of data and in different sort of forms. So number one is big data is about volume. So as you know that over the last few years, 90% of the data was generated over the last 2 years. So over thousands of years, the data set itself is replicated in 2 years. So the last 2 years is doubled in sizes itself. More important thing, it's the data velocity. The data are being churned out in seconds. Like for example, there are 170,000 tweets per second right now. So massive amount of data. And data variety as well. So no longer are those days when the data just residing in one single database, right? So there are multiple sort of data. Some data are unstructured. For example, your Facebook, you post certain comments, right? People like certain things. So a lot of this data are basically unstructured sort of data, and it comes from different forms. It could be video, it could be geospatial, location-based, and whatnot. And also, big data is becoming more important is because the veracity as well, because the technology allows us to establish quality and accuracy of the data, especially on the unstructured data sets. So combine of these four elements, it's important that these days is through the technology such as cloud computing, different sort of tools and whatnot. So this big data can be turned into value. This value could be important from an economic standpoint, from a government benefit standpoint, and a society standpoint. Okay, so knowing that this is important, why data is important, analytics is important, MDEC through Communication and Multimedia Ministry has been tasked by the government of Malaysia through our MSc Implementation Council meeting chaired by our Prime Minister to come up with a framework so that we're able to lead the nation towards a leading regional big data analytics player. So our goal here is we want to ensure that our country moves towards a knowledge-based economy, digital economy, and to do that we need to make sure that we have the right solutions and that we're able to deliver big data as a new growth area within all sectors. The mission of this is that we want to create a national ecosystem so that BDA can be used to further economic growth. So we look at this from two sides, the demand side and the supply side. The demand side is basically how can we look at BDA to act as a catalyst for productivity gain. Because you can get a lot of insights from data, you can actually use it to optimize your operations, you can use analytics to actually, looking at better allocation of resources, right? So you know what's the utilization rate and whatnot. Benefits for Rakyat, so some of this application will be useful for Rakyat. For example, in the United States, there's quite a number of case studies on the use of big data analytics to analyze a crime. So what they do is they look at data related to crime, and then they're able to predict when the crime is going to happen, probability. And then what they do is they will deploy police forces into those areas, and they have seen tremendous reduction in terms of crime in those areas. So this is one example how this can be used for optimization of resources, but at the same time helping the society as well. Catalyst of game-changing innovation. So looking at how data analytics can actually look at improving your business models. And to do that, we need to increase the demand side adoption. At the same time, we need to build an industry as well. So you need to build companies who are able to provide the solutions and whatnot. And more important thing is actually the enablers. How do you build enablers to enable this to happen? Number one is we need to change mindset of people that you should make use of your data. You don't just store your data, but you need to share and also to analyze this data to get certain insight. Second is the people and talent. We need to create a lot more people who are able to analyze data sets. These are data scientists, as well as the supporting structure around this, which includes data architect, data engineers, to help with that effort. Data is important, so therefore we put in data governance and policy, technology platform, and open innovation. So those are the elements. I'll elaborate more in the next few slides. Okay. So in the first area, we are proud to note that since we launched the initiative last year, there's tremendous interest from the institution of higher learning. They wanted to offer this as a new course offering, courses related to data. So some of them are offering courses on data science, some call it data analytics, some call it business analytics, and some call it data engineering. But statisticians, yes, those are mathematics. So what the difference between data scientist and a statistician is the data scientists actually look at using different tool sets and whatnot. and they're mainly looking at solving problems related to the industry, related to certain sectors and whatnot. And they actually applied mainly, different analytics tool. So typically there's 4 different areas when you look at analytics. One is typically when you do your monthly reporting, you do a charts and whatnot. Those are descriptive analytics. Most people can do that. Right. The second area is more in depth is that when you do the reporting, your boss will ask you, why is this so high and why is this so low? Right. So you need to look at more diagnostic, looking at what seems to be the problem. Is it because there's a high number of MC for that day? Or is it because, it's raining outside, so that's why people don't come to the conference, right? So those are kind of patterns that you need to look at. Third is basically predictive analytics. So looking at this, if you know it's a Monday, and it's after a festive season, you can actually predict, maybe of certain degree of accuracy, 80% of chance that 90% of people will turn up. Will turn up in the office, 10% will go on MC. So because those pattern, right? So for HR practitioner, typically you are very, descriptive. You just provide historical data. But imagine that you're able to provide your bosses, that okay, based on what I've learned and based on these data sets and whatnot, I can say that, boss, tomorrow I think 90% is going to come up, 10% shortfall. Even if people apply for leave or and whatnot, please make sure that you cancel this people leave, or you need to take part-time staff and whatnot. So those are those insights. So what I described to you are actually prescriptive analytics. So that means you're able to predict certain things. You can take measure to basically take action before that. So that's why it's very powerful, and that's why a lot of these universities are coming up with courses. Data analytics is not just for the computer science people, but it's also cut across, because you can look at data analytics for respective area. I think in the US they're talking about accountants should actually have some data analytics skills, because you can actually use those skills to predict what's going to happen and whatnot. And coincidentally, I was told that in the US, a lot of the data scientists are employed in the financial sector, because you can make a lot of money from predicting stock markets, whether it's going to come up or go down and whatnot. So these are areas that you can actually look at.
Is it just an extension of what we would know previously, or what we would know as business intelligence?
Business intelligence, yes, but business intelligence deals with a lot of descriptive and diagnostic area. It doesn't give more predictive elements with some degree of accuracy. Because business intelligence in the past, they just rely on a single or 2 or 3 sort of databases, and it's structured data. Whereas this, you can couple it with unstructured and structured data, and this provides you with a better insight. And the tools these days allow you to do this in a faster way. Ability to process the data in a lot faster manner compared to the in the past. So these are universities that are looking at the formal education, and we are also looking for upskilling and certification as well. So you notice some in this area. Currently, there's not a lot of courses offered in the big data or data science area. Some of them are offered by vendor-based solutions, but for neutral ones are quite limited. So therefore, we have looked around the world, and we found that Coursera is actually through the Johns Hopkins Data Science program. It's one of the most popular ones. It's actually done online through a massive online content creation. We want to scale this up rapidly. So we actually chose this model, a blended learning approach where the content is available online, and we are subsidizing this through our MyProCert program. So we actually have classes which are conducted twice every month, together with the online sort of approach. And so far, the response has been very good. We have more than 550 people who sign up in less than a month. So typical approach of doing this is that you do classes. One class is 20 people, and you need 30 classes to reach 500. So what we've done is we have done this approach, and hopefully we're able to scale this as we move along. Okay, open data. This is one of the focus area for our data governance side. The reason why we do this is, I'm sure that if you are in the university, you find it's very difficult to get data from the government. You have to write in, you have to wait for them to approve. Similarly as well, if you are businesses, it's difficult to get data. If you're a startup, a lot of startup are trying to do applications related to transportation. They can't do it because they can't get access to data, right? So that's the reason why, and government has a lot of data. So that's the reason why we want to focus on open data, because this is an example how government can actually share the data through an open data initiative. Currently, UK is ranked #1 globally from open data, even though they only have 16,000 data sets, because they're very innovative in terms of publishing quality data sets that the developers or community would want, and they also make sure that those data are being used by the community. Example, Transport for London, they actually open up their tube schedules, transportation schedule. Because of this, there are more than 400 different apps on transportation alone are being created. And communities are quite smart. They actually blend this, what you call it, the schedule together with, let's say if you are a vegetarian, you are in London, then they actually point you to the right restaurant and tell you what exactly the public transport that you should take. So that's to that detail. So your
job is to get us to that level of cleverness?
Yes, by having more data sets. So the good news is that we actually partner with the Open Data Institute in the UK. They are actually advisor to the UK government on open data. Through them, we have managed to appoint a national open data champion. There's 12 ministries who are on board right now. They are actively looking at what sort of data they can actually publish on the open data within the ministry. So good news is organizations like SPAD, they're going to release the bus schedule towards the end of the month. And I think a lot of them are, even the JAKIM has actually released the data related to their restaurant online as well. So, and if you are developers, you can even create apps around this, where to locate the mosques or halal restaurants and whatnot. Those are approved restaurant lists. So these are opportunity for, imagine this opportunity that you can available for the developers and community. Right, so currently there are 226 data sets. Last year was 126, so there's improvement in terms of the number. And last year Malaysia wasn't ranked, and the year before Malaysia wasn't ranked, and last year, because through some effort we are ranked a bit, but this year our targets are a lot higher than that. So next is, this is to address issues related to lack of resources, and a lot of companies want to do big data analytics but do not know how. So what we have done is we have partnered with organizations that has these resources. They have their own data scientists, they have their own data team, and we are working with them to come up with different use cases that are impactful, and that would resonate in the businesses. So these are some of the initiative that was generated. Okay. So that's the end of presentation. Obviously, we have a lot of other things that we're doing. Part and parcel of it, like Big Data Week, was organized in April. We are quite happy to receive more than 3,000 people attending the session. So we are quite pleased. But moving forward, we need to create a lot more awareness, create more talent pool to basically to address some of our needs.
Just have a seat there, and Bob, maybe I'll just invite you up there as well. Maybe, Bob, you can share with us a little bit about your company, what it does, and what a typical client would, require your services for.
Right. So, well, we started, I think, the last time we spoke a few years ago I would classify that now as small data because, as Karl sort of pointed out, big data has really exploded in the past 2 years just because of the emergence of all our devices and cheaper bandwidth, higher internet penetration, etc. So our business has evolved as well to now gravitate into big data just by default. So we used to work around the 4 Ps, if you guys remember that from college days, product, price, place, promotion, and whereby we typically work around how best to price your product, how best to brand it, where to distribute it, etc. That was our traditional cookie cutter type work. Now, in the big data space, we've had to sort of re-engineer the kind of talent pool that requires, as Karl was mentioning, the kind of technology we use, and hence the kind of engagements that we get involved in is quite different. It's no longer about brand awareness, brand positioning, price elasticity, etc. I'll probably mention 2 or 3 case studies of what we're doing to give you a taste of how one uses big data in a commercial sense. So the first one, probably the easiest one, whereby we've worked with a soft drinks manufacturer for many years, and previously on the topics of those 4 Ps. Today, however, with things like open data, weather patterns, foot traffic patterns, etc., retail data, and all of these things that are now open, merged with internal point of sales data, social network data, etc., we can actually help them predict potential sales within the year before it even happens. So, for example, if this client used to have a $100 million media budget, they'd work with their media agencies and say, I want to spend $10 million over different months on different mediums, TV, outdoor, etc. But it's not necessarily optimized. It's basically media planned to a certain degree. But with big data now, we can really optimize it by predicting which store is actually going to sell more drinks based on the weather by default, based on all the historical data we use. So even before you spend a single cent on advertising, we know that store A in, say, Lot 10 versus somewhere in Klang is going to sell a certain volume just by weather patterns or traffic patterns, right? So they can then rejig their media planning towards lower traffic areas so that they re-optimize sales. So this is how we're using it in the context of the commercial landscape with the Fortune 500 type clients we work with. Now, the other 2 examples I'll give are quite revolutionary as well, because it's to do with, one of them is to do with disaster. And we've had a few disasters recently in this part of the world. And this goes back to, I think, about 2 years ago when Typhoon, was it Tacloban, Typhoon Haiyan, I think it was, in the Philippines. So one of the central banks in Asia, actually based in the Philippines, you probably know who it is, I think if you guys remember Typhoon Haiyan, and the city of Tacloban was literally wiped out based on this big typhoon. And it took 5 days to get physical aid into that city, right? So these poor people had no water, no assistance, no nothing for 5 days because it's quite remote and all the distribution was broken off, etc. Now, let alone financial aid, right? So forget about the physical aid. The financial aid of what was pledged, I think, was somewhere in the region of $5 billion. To date, to today, I think actual money that's actually got into redevelopment is about less than $5 million. Okay, so that's a problem. So this redevelopment bank, this development bank, what they said is that we can't have this happen again. Let's use some big data to predict the next possible disaster location, right? Using seismic data, weather patterns, etc. for the past 40 or 50 years. And we've brought in chaos theorists, we've brought in seismologists and all these sorts of things to really try to the best degree that we can predict where the next possible Typhoon Haiyan is going to be. Now, if we can predict that, we can also predict the potential casualties, the potential dollar value loss, and where we can do disaster recovery before these things even happen, right? Relocation, etc. But the most important thing that they wanted to do was to prepare a redevelopment fund before the disaster even happens. Okay, so if we know that a specific location is going to kill 10,000 people, have $2 billion of collateral damage of property, etc., they can actually prepare this redevelopment fund to access that area and redevelop things before it even happens. So that's pretty revolutionary stuff, right? So you can now predict based on, say, fault lines of earthquakes, etc., to potentially help areas like Nepal, Sabah, and all these sort of places that have been hit really badly recently. So that's some interesting work that we're doing out there, and then sort of beyond what we would have imagined using big data for. Now, another, this is the last example I'll give, another big issue that the world is facing now is terrorism. And I think a lot of the issues that we're facing with, say, terrorism and counterterrorism, especially in the Middle East, etc., really started off with the Arab Spring. And if you look at how the Arab Spring broke out, it broke out based on one tweet from a trade vendor who was beaten up, and people were just at boiling point because they're so fed up. And when this trader got beaten up, that just spread virally on Twitter, and that started eventually the Arab Spring. Now, the Arab Spring created a civil war. Mubarak was taken out of government, and it triggered the same sort of uproar in the other countries. So uprising in Tunisia, Libya, etc. And then you've seen these big countries topple. Now, it all started from one tweet. So a country in the Gulf and the GCC had engaged us to predict or help them measure the sort of pulse, I use that pun, but the sort of pulse of each Gulf nation of when the potential next Arab Spring is going to happen, based on people's conversations, based on the sentiment, based on what is the boiling point of these countries, where the influence is happening from, who it's happening from, the influences, etc. So they're using big data.
Should we be worried?
Possibly. So it's a very, very interesting program that they're doing. And I wouldn't say it's snooping because if you put anything on Twitter, Facebook, etc., it's public domain anyway. But we're basically quantifying these conversations, putting some algorithms around the feel of it and when the potential boiling points are and where they are. So interesting stuff. But that just gives you 3 different examples of commercial, something more for humanity type projects, and the last being sort of security type stuff.
So these kind of projects at the moment is under the auspice of very large organizations, it's very enterprise-wide governments, and so it's not something that the SMEs have access to yet.
Yeah, I mean, sadly, I think big data requirements and the emergence of big data is usually, it stems from people that have a lot of data. So if you look at industry, it's usually large organizations, and it's usually the folks who are dealing with a lot of data are the telcos and financial services. So the first adopters of big data in most countries that we're seeing are telcos, because basically they have a pipe that feeds data, that feeds video, that feeds music, that feeds voice, VoIP, etc., and potentially fraud. So they use it for fraud detection. They use it to detect where data is going, etc. And they have deep pockets, so they can invest in this. And financial services, because they have so much transactions from internet transactions, POS transactions, etc. So, and also they've got deep pockets. Now SMEs, some of them have more data, some have less. Affordability of getting big data experts and tools, etc., is still, to be honest, out of reach of SMEs. And the applications and the kind of tools that are not necessarily built for the masses yet. I think, and I hope we'll get there, where you have sort of a software as a service for SMEs. You have people within small, medium-sized enterprise that are trained. So in Singapore, for example, the government actually subsidizes training at least one analyst in every single SME, and the government actually pays for that, so that you can train up your guys in small, medium enterprise to understand how to start a big data project, how to leverage data sets within your company, etc. So that's a, sort of a start in the right direction.
Dr. Karl, could you expand on that story and what happened in London when they were talking about the schedule and how, that information benefits the restaurants and the people around it, and how something like that possibly could be replicated here as well?
Essentially, that's the open data sort of effort. Basically, what happened is that they actually have quite an advanced system where they make this data not just available. These are machine-readable data sets, so at minimum it has to be, Excel sort of format, but it's actually machine-readable sort of format. So and what happened is that in the UK, they actually have a platform where they actually have this data available, and they also have an API where developers can access this data on a real-time basis, right? So developers basically build applications around that using those data sets. So essentially, and this enabled them because they have other data sets as well. So what happened is, one example is, ability to take these two data sets and come up with a certain algorithm to tell them, where to go and what time and whatnot. I think it's going to happen in Malaysia because, like as I mentioned earlier on, organizations like SPAT, they are committed to do this. They're putting up tracking systems in the buses right now, and they want to make this data available. So that's good. And at the same time as well, like organization like Jakim, they actually put up the halal restaurant within the system as well. And coupled with other sort of data sets, then you can actually it's up to the imagination of the people. How to use these data sets to generate certain insights and whatnot. So that is quite critical. So what's more important is it's as Bob mentioned, is basically having the right talent. People that are able to do this is quite critical. You need to build analytical skill sets for the workforce as well as in the universities, because moving forward, everyone has massive amount of data, and we need to make use of this data for greater insights. I think that's quite critical as we move forward.
Obviously, we're open, for questions. Anybody's got any questions? Yes.
In terms of the commercial side of the data collection, there is a lot of. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. In terms of how it's actually the data is actually being collated, because it takes a lot of input before you get this big data. Wouldn't you say there's some aspect of it where it's encroaching privacy? Because I wouldn't want someone coming up to me and saying, I think because of your pattern of movement, this is where you can go and eat and this is where you can go and shop.
It's called Google Notes.
I think privacy is a concern with a lot of people. But if you notice, Malaysia has a PDP Act and it's enforced. And that there's a fine print by agreeing to sign up with certain services, you agree to disclose some of this data, right? So it's a free services, and therefore you opt in from that perspective, right? So big data, I mean, in organizations, they will what do you call it, respect your privacy. They'll make sure that, whatever things they're doing is defined within the law, because you have give consent for certain data sets. If they were to share data sets, then there's certain techniques you can actually use. You can actually anonymize those data sets, or you can aggregate those numbers. Instead of just pinpoint one person, you take an average of, let's say, 60 people within this within this hall, and say that average age of these people here today is 35, right? And then you take another one. But because of the data itself is a lot of data over, let's say, 10 years, then you can get still get a certain insights out of this, right?
I think that works more for countries where the privacy laws have matured, as opposed to Malaysia, right?
Malaysia is we actually have a PDP.
I know we do.
Yes.
It's just that I'm talking about more matured instances of where the PDP privacy laws are more advanced. Like, for example, in the UK, the Privacy Commissioner does take a very advanced and a very active role, as opposed to in Malaysia. How would you look at that?
Basically, I think it's agree that it's basically the law is new, and I think a lot of times even the consumers are not aware of their rights and whatnot. So I think there's a lot of educations are required in terms of education the public. Example of this, it's I was in a conference just now. F-Secure actually talk about viruses. Some of in Malaysia, they actually say that some of the viruses that appears in our laptops are viruses that are obsolete in other countries. The 10 years ago sort of viruses. Else in where most of the viruses are related to click on a picture or click or something. And in overseas right now, they don't have this sort of viruses anymore. It's more advanced. So eventually you get there, but I think but you need to educate the people.
Anyone else? Yes, Jane.
Yeah, Karl, how do you address the IP issue, the ownership of the IP from various contributors of this big data? Have you all discussed this is there a plan to regulate this, or are you going to rely on the current framework of IP?
Yes, I think the IP side of things, we have not. I mean, the regulation part it's quite big portion of work, because I think the data sharing it's basically not an easy task. Even now within agencies within Malaysia, they're not sharing data because there are certain act which doesn't allow them to share. I think from an open data standpoint, sharing of data and whatnot, I think this is under the open license perspective. The data can be shared, but there are certain clauses there as well that that whoever shares this data are not liable if anything happens, right? From open data standpoint. So IP perspective, it's an open license. So it's basically, anyone can make use of these data sets to create a certain.
But there will be someone who owns, the big data, right? And if a user were to approach, let's say, MDEC and say, look, I want a license, I want a right to use it, let's say SME would like to tap into, the availability of the data. Yeah. Who should be the owner of this big data to say that, yes, I have the right to license you to use the database?
Okay, so it's basically it can go on a long debate on this, because I think obviously there comes with a certain clause and condition there when you actually sign up that whatever data that you actually release can be used for the organization for marketing purposes, and they define what sort of thing. So you actually it's basically subjected to terms and conditions of whatever things, the data that you release to the other party. But obviously, I think in the UK, for example, they're exploring in the more advanced sort of methods of doing certain things. For example, your data belongs to you. The experimentation, for example, the data belongs to you. Let's say your medical records and whatnot. Why should I be giving this data to a healthcare provider and not monetize, my data, right? So imagine if you own these data sets and you have the right for these data sets, then you can actually say that you sell this data back to a healthcare provider, and then they can actually monetize those data. For example, healthcare data is very valuable, right? You can actually use it for insurance purposes, predicting the insurance claim. You can use it for predicting a lot of different things, and this is a high value, right? So currently, the data is owned by whoever people that you give this data, but you don't own it from that standpoint.
Questions, anyone? Yes.
What is the method that you use to break the big data? Because we can break the Twitter. Someone tweet like in Malaysia, panas kot. Panas kot means it's hot. 200 kot means 200. It's kot, word kot and kot is so different and it's invalid, right? Invalid. How do you differ the code you did and what the method to use it?
So yeah, I think you're talking about unstructured data, right? Especially on social networks, etc., like Twitter. Now, we actually do a lot of work on that topic, whereby we quantify first of all keywords, and then you need to then put some kind of context to it. So, to your example of hot and the various degrees of hot, whether it gets hotter, and even things like emoticons, slang, smileys, all these sorts of things. We've had to look at all of these potential sentiments, if you will, because this creates a sentiment. It's not just saying 2,000 people said panas at the same time, but you want to see the context of it. Is it this chick is hot, or is the weather hot? Two different things, but he's saying hot. So we actually need to string a context to it to actually create some meaning out of it. So we actually have algorithms in multiple languages to create positive sentiment, negative sentiment, and some context to what you were referring to earlier on, and that's all done by algorithms. So we actually do all of those things. Otherwise, all this data will be unstructured and wouldn't mean anything.
Anyone else? Okay, Dr. Karl, you were talking about government savings, right? Where, what areas do you see how, with big data, it can help in government savings?
Not just savings.
Yeah. Not just, okay, but like in what areas do you see how this can actually help?
Okay. I think in terms of resource allocation, I think in planning purposes, for example, let's say to build, resources allocation is one way. For example, if you were to build a school, for example, with big data analytics, you probably know, who are the people around this area, and by combining different sort of data sets, that the transportation, what are the level of education in this area, and whatnot. So you're able to then allocate the resources more effectively as you move along. So I think one way is a resources allocation perspective. Second thing is actually even to the extent of, even income generation as well. Because for a fact, let's say in your neighborhood, this neighbor, right, has been doing so much renovation and whatnot, but they may not be paying the right sort of taxes, right? Especially you're doing certain businesses and whatnot. So this one way to look at things as well, to look at if people are underpaying or and whatnot by looking at data sets in the various different areas. So that could be potential, what they call it, revenue generation as well, apart from productivity gain.
So you'll be able to tell that by the kind of house they've renovated. What you're saying, that's if they actually tell DBKL they're actually doing a renovation to their house. Any other questions? No? Anything else to add? Bob, Dr. Karl, maybe final statement, then we can all go for lunch. Let's do lunch. Dr. Karl?
No, I think to embark on this, I think it's important that you can do baby steps and whatnot to look into this. It's big data analytics. I mean, forget about the big. It's about data analytics. It's important, right? And it's important for us to know what you're doing, so that you're able to make certain improvement. All of us have their own way to do it right now. It may not be very advanced, right? You look at patterns and whatnot, and you take certain actions around it. So moving forward, we want more people to be able to use the data that you have, and also gain certain insights and to make improvement as you move along. So from our perspective, MDEC standpoint, we will continuously we will try to move this agenda forward, train more people, have more use cases. We are even coming up with programs for the SME perspective to look at how can we help SME from a data analytics standpoint. So this is something that we are moving forward as well.
Bob, final words.
So I think in whatever business you guys are in, look at analytics and big data as a tool to give you guys an edge amongst your competition, first of all. Secondly, if you look at the trends, if you're a startup, for example, in the US and in more developed markets, the analytics and big data startups are the ones attracting the most funding right now. So if you're looking at getting into the space, it's extremely lucrative, and in Asia, there's very, very few companies doing this. Now, if you're looking for a job, it's the second highest paying profession right now after oil and gas geologist. So if you look at the trends on LinkedIn and salaries, etc., it's very, very, it's almost impossible to get a data scientist. So I think getting trained up in this industry is extremely key, and it's only going to continue. So forget about big data. It's going to be bigger tomorrow. So it shouldn't scare us, and I think everyone should get into it.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen. Dr. Karl, and of course, Bob. I don't know if you're going to stay for lunch, but I would like to find out who is next on the list, the next hotspot. Anyway, thank you very much, gentlemen. And of course, the next session is 2 o'clock. Please be on time so that we can do everything on time. Thank you. We'll see you then.